In this episode, we're going to build a clear beginner understanding of what access control is really for, because a lot of confusion in cybersecurity comes from treating access control as a single feature, like a login screen, instead of as a broader system that decides who can do what and under what conditions. Access control is one of the most foundational ideas in security, and it shows up everywhere, from logging into a laptop to viewing a file, running an application action, connecting to a network resource, or changing a configuration. When it works well, access control quietly prevents damage and reduces risk without getting in the way. When it works poorly, it creates either a false sense of security or a frustrating environment that people bypass. The purpose of this episode is to make access control feel logical and predictable by explaining the core goals, the key pieces that make it work, and why it matters so much in real environments where both attackers and mistakes are always possible. A simple way to define access control is that it is the set of rules and mechanisms that determine whether a subject is allowed to perform an action on an object. Subject is usually a user, but it can also be a service account, a device, or a process acting on behalf of a user. Object is whatever is being accessed, like a file, a database record, an application function, or a network service. The action might be read, write, delete, execute, modify, or administer. This definition sounds formal, but it's helpful because it forces you to think in terms of a decision, allow or deny, based on defined conditions. The beginner trap is thinking access control only happens at the moment you log in. In reality, access control decisions can happen continuously, every time you attempt to do something that matters. Logging in is often just the first gate. After that, the system still needs to decide what you are allowed to do inside the environment. To understand why access control exists, it helps to start with the basic security problem it addresses. In any environment with shared systems and valuable data, not everyone should be able to do everything. If every user could change configurations, read all data, and delete records, then a single mistake or a single compromised account could destroy the environment. Access control limits that risk by narrowing authority. It is a way of reducing the blast radius of both malicious actions and accidental errors. Access control also supports privacy, because certain information should only be visible to specific roles. It supports integrity, because only authorized users should be able to modify critical data. And it supports availability, because restricting administrative functions reduces the chance of disruptive changes. So access control is not just about keeping outsiders out. It is also about managing insiders, systems, and processes in a way that keeps operations safe and predictable. Another key reason access control matters is that it creates trust boundaries, which are places where the system transitions from not trusting to trusting, or from trusting broadly to trusting narrowly. When you authenticate, the system learns who you claim to be and gains some confidence in that claim. But after that, the system still needs to manage trust based on what you are trying to do. For example, it might trust you to view your own information, but not trust you to view someone else's records. It might trust you to submit a request, but not trust you to approve it. It might trust you to use an application, but not trust you to change its security settings. These boundaries are crucial because they prevent privilege creep, where access slowly expands over time without deliberate decisions. Without clear trust boundaries enforced by access control, environments tend to drift toward overpermissioning, and overpermissioning is one of the most common root causes of major security incidents. Access control is often described as having three big parts, and understanding them helps you reason about how systems make decisions. The first part is identification, which is simply the claim of who you are, like a username or account identifier. The second part is authentication, which is how the system verifies that claim, such as with a password or another factor. The third part is authorization, which is where the system decides what you can do after you are recognized and verified. Beginners frequently mix up authentication and authorization, and that confusion can lead to wrong answers on questions. Authentication answers the question, "Who are you?" while authorization answers the question, "What are you allowed to do?" Access control is mostly about authorization, but it depends on identification and authentication to establish the subject that the authorization rules apply to. If authentication is weak, then access control decisions are being made for the wrong person. If authorization is weak, then even a correctly authenticated user might be allowed to do too much. A practical way to make this feel real is to imagine a shared system with different roles. A student might be allowed to read course materials and submit assignments, but not change grades. An instructor might be allowed to create content and grade, but not change system security settings. An administrator might be allowed to manage accounts, but that administrative access should be carefully restricted because it is powerful. Access control exists to enforce those distinctions reliably. If the system relies on everyone behaving properly without enforcement, then it will eventually fail because someone will make a mistake, or someone will misuse access, or an attacker will compromise an account. Access control is the enforcement mechanism that makes the rules real. It reduces reliance on trust and increases reliance on verifiable decisions. That is why access control is often considered one of the first and most important control families in security frameworks. Another important purpose of access control is enabling accountability through traceability, which means being able to connect actions to identities. When access control is designed correctly, actions in a system can be attributed to a specific account, and ideally to a specific person. This supports auditing, investigation, and deterrence. If multiple people share an account, traceability is lost, and you cannot reliably tell who performed an action. If access is overly broad, investigation becomes harder because many people could have done the same thing. And if authorization is inconsistent, people might claim they were allowed to do something when they were not. Strong access control supports accountability by creating clear expectations about permissions and by producing records that show who did what. For beginners, it's helpful to see that access control is not only about preventing bad actions. It also helps you understand what happened when something goes wrong. Access control decisions are also shaped by context, which includes conditions beyond just the identity of the user. Context might include the device being used, the network location, the time of day, or the sensitivity of the action. For example, a system might allow you to sign in from your normal device with fewer prompts, but require additional verification from a new device. It might allow viewing data from a trusted network, but restrict access from untrusted locations. It might allow routine actions freely, but require stronger checks for high-impact actions like changing payment details or accessing sensitive records. This context-based thinking is important because it shows that access control is not always a static list of permissions. Modern systems often incorporate risk signals to make safer decisions. The purpose remains the same, controlling who can do what, but the inputs to the decision can be richer than a simple username and password. A common beginner misconception is that access control is only about permissions on data, but it also applies to functions and capabilities. For example, in a business application, the ability to approve a transaction is a capability, not a data file. In a system administration context, the ability to create users, change configurations, or disable security settings are capabilities. These function-level permissions are often even more important than file-level permissions because they can change system behavior. Access control for capabilities is also closely connected to separation of duties, which is the idea that critical actions should require multiple roles so one person cannot both initiate and approve a sensitive change. This reduces fraud and abuse, but it also reduces the chance of accidental high-impact mistakes. When you think about access control, always think beyond files. Think about what actions the system allows and which actions must be restricted carefully. Access control also has to balance security with usability, because controls that are too strict or confusing can backfire. If people cannot get their work done, they will seek workarounds, like sharing passwords, using personal accounts, or storing data in unapproved places. Those workarounds often create bigger risks than the original problem. A well-designed access control system makes the secure path the easy path, meaning users can do what they need to do without constant friction while still preventing risky actions. This balance is where policy and governance come into play, because the organization must decide what risks are acceptable and what trade-offs are worth making. For beginners, it's useful to recognize that access control is a design challenge, not a simple on or off switch. Good access control reflects thoughtful choices about what needs protection, who needs access, and how to manage that access over time. One more purpose of access control is limiting lateral movement, which is the way attackers expand their reach after initial compromise. Many attacks start with one account or one system, then spread as the attacker looks for more privileges, more data, or more control. If access control is well-scoped and least privilege is applied, an attacker who compromises a basic account should not automatically gain access to sensitive systems or administrative functions. That containment is one of the most valuable benefits of access control. Even if the first line is breached, access control boundaries can prevent the incident from becoming much worse. This is also where segmentation and role design matter, because access control is not just the mechanism, it is also the structure of who has access to what. If the structure is overly flat, a single compromise can reach too much. If the structure has meaningful boundaries, compromise can be contained. As you put all of this together, access control becomes a clear story about reducing risk by making deliberate, enforceable decisions about authority. It defines who a subject is, verifies that identity, decides what actions are allowed, and records those actions so accountability is possible. It supports confidentiality by restricting who can read data, integrity by restricting who can modify, and availability by restricting who can disrupt. It also supports real-world operations by enabling roles and responsibilities to exist in the system rather than only in job titles. When you understand the purpose of access control this way, you are set up to learn the models of access control, the mechanics of authentication, and the practical risks of privilege mismanagement. Access control is the central mechanism that turns trust into rules, and those rules are one of the strongest tools we have for keeping complex systems safe.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.